Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to our session. How are we doing today? Good? I know the room is a little bit dark, but hopefully you coffeeed up already and not falling asleep during the session, because we have a full hour packed of a lot of great content for you. So thanks, everybody, for coming. Today, we'll be talking about how Merck is leveraging generative AI to advance healthcare data extraction using text-to-SQL on AWS. And very quick, this is going to be our agenda for the next hour or so. We're going to give you a little bit primer. Again, you've probably already heard a lot, and you'll be continuing hearing more about generative AI. We still decide to do it. We're going to talk a little about their application in healthcare and life science. Then we'll share a little about Merck's challenge in data analytics and how we decide to build this text-to-SQL solution. We'll give you a demo of how it works. And finally, we'll wrap it up with the impact and future directions we're thinking of taking. But before that, let me quickly introduce the presenters here today. My name is Henry Wang, and I'm a senior applied scientist from Generative AI Innovation Center from AWS. And on the stage with me later on will be Vladimir Tershitsky, the principal scientist from Merck, and then Tasfagbir Maheshsky, my colleague, applied scientist from Gen AI Innovation Center as well. So today, this morning, we had an exciting announcement again about the foundational models. So again, what is generative AI, right? Really, generative AI, in our opinions, it's a couple things. First of all, it's powered by foundational models. These foundational models are pre-trained on large corpus of data, and they usually have large volume of parameters around them. And then they can, and being really good at producing original content. That's close enough to what we're seeing that humans can be producing. One thing that's really good about them is that rather than the old days where you have to build these specialized models for each individual tasks, right now, these foundational models can actually do a lot of things. They can generalize to many tasks very well. But at the same time, you have the capability to specialize them and customize them into specific domains of your interest. These features, or these set of features, have made the development of any innovations much faster and allows us to iterate much quicker as well. I don't know if many of you went to the visionaries in the stadium last night. Any of you? Show of hands if you went. Great. See a couple hands. As Andrew mentioned there, really the barrier to innovation has been significantly reduced now. And anything you can prototype in maybe just a matter of hours. And maybe it's just a weekend that you can put up the next great demo for your organization. So here is a quick graph of the volume of use cases that our team, Generative AI Innovation Center, have been seeing, where we receive thousands of companies that are trying to come and work with us. And here we break it down really just by industry. As you can see here, the top one, there are financial industries, there are software and internet companies, but healthcare and life science also represent a pretty significant portion of all the incoming use cases that our team have worked on. I'm assuming a lot of you sitting here today are working in the domain, so you have seen a lot of the application for generative AI in healthcare domains, right? There are chatbot or agent that can help summarize patient histories, the clinician notes from the doctors, so the doctors know before their next patient visits what's been happening, what's the latest status with the state or the update with this patient, right? You have more and more companies and startups trying to leverage generative AI to facilitate with drug discovery. You have companies working on these multimodal models that are trying to understand images and to help facilitate with diagnosis. And then specifically for today, we like to talk about how we can leverage generative AI to work on insight extraction from structured data. Well, before that, I think we want to just lay a couple premises here, and hopefully you can relate. These are some of the evolving landscape that we're observing in the healthcare domain data. The very first thing, you're seeing exploding amount of volume for the data. You have data coming from everywhere, from going to the doctor's office, coming from your personal devices, right? You have increasing data complexity. It's not just about structured data anymore. You have a lot of unstructured data. You have images. You have audios. How do you really make sense of all these data? And last but not least, the increasing, more difficult data interoperability part, where all these data coming from different sources, and sometimes they can be siloed, and they don't really talk to each other. So all these challenges have made the traditional way of how we look at healthcare data analytics to be inadequate, and we need to think about how we can leverage these new technologies to bridge the gaps. Let's take a quick look at healthcare analytics before Gen AI happens. So imagine you are a business user, and you're trying to identify these records that meets a couple conditions, X, Y, Z. You'll need to go find your experienced analyst on the team who has really abundant knowledge around the databases, the documentations, the definitions, graphs, diagrams, and who has this domain knowledge about all of these things and also knows how to write the correct analytical language and the framework that the company is leveraging. And then they will write and execute these programming languages, like a SQL here, and then pass back the results to you. Now with Gen AI, when you have similar types of requests, instead you can really feed a lot of the knowledge and train this large language model to understand about your documentations, your diagrams, your tech stacks, and then ask them to quickly and efficiently write out these SQL statements for you. And then you will have the analyst by the side to be human in the loop that advise and supervise the correction and accuracy of the statements written by large language model. And then this allows the model or this turnaround time to be really fast. So this really liberates both the business users and analysts to spending their time to focus more on the creative insights that's extracted from those statements or these programming languages. Now, without further ado, let me introduce Vlad to the stage to introduce about Merck and the challenges Merck has faced.
Thank you. Well, great. I'm Vladimir Tojitsky. I go by Vlad, and I work at Merck. Merck is a pharmaceutical company, and what we do is we try to use the power of leading-edge science to save and improve lives around the world. I work in a specific team called the Real-World Evidence Capabilities and Analytics team. It's in Merck Research Labs, and we're focused on observational real-world data. And if you don't know what exactly real-world data means, you're probably where I was when I started in the group. Real-world data is a pharmaceutical jargon term that's used for any kind of data that's collected outside of clinical trials. So common examples include electronic medical records or insurance claims data. And our team is interested in data science, and we've been collaborating with AWS for a number of years. One of the things that we've accomplished is the CMS AI Health Outcomes Challenge. We were top 25 innovators in that challenge, and the only pharmaceutical company to get in that ranking. We also maintain an open source repository of algorithms. Some of them are machine learning algorithms. Some of them are biostatistical packages. So we're interested in contributing to leading edge science just as much as to help our patients and to help lives around the world. So those are just a few examples. And in terms of real-world data, the real-world database ecosystem is very large. Each one of these is a company that the way that real-world data works is we don't actually collect our own real-world data. So there are companies that we license real-world data from. And each one of these companies is either emerging, the landscape is constantly changing. Maybe, can I get a show of hands? Who here has ever heard of any one of these companies? We've got a few hands, pretty good. All right, but I'm willing to bet, since we're in Las Vegas, I'm willing to bet that none of you have actually worked with all of these data sets. Anybody? Show of hands? Okay, at least we have an honest crowd. So that's our challenge, really, is that we have so many different data sets. Each one of these have different structures. And the way we manage data at Merck is we have a platform called the Real World Data Exchange. So starting on the right-hand side, this platform caters to 3 different types of users. Quantitative data scientists are scientists that essentially like to get their hands dirty with the data. They like to do the programming. Citizen data scientists are interested in the data and analytics, but don't necessarily want to get into the code. And inside consumers just want to see the results. They typically want to help their business leaders. Those are the 3 kind of personas that the platform deals with. And on the left-hand side, we have advanced analytics tools that we develop on the platform that are catered to the quantitative data scientists. Self-service tools, which things like cohort builders, they cater to the citizen data scientists. And this is all supported by knowledge management tools that enable users to identify the data sets, basically search through the metadata. 2, they enable users to search through analysis. And then they provide supporting training information as well. So several challenges with our platform right now is, as I mentioned, we have many databases. And each database has unique structure, unique variables. So programming makes it, developing SQL on these data sets makes it difficult. To make it more complicated, there's hundreds of variables. You probably have, many of you have worked with some of these data sets, so you may know. And common data models, which is one potential solution, is to translate, a common data model translates each of the variables into a common name and format. So it sounds good, but oftentimes there's losses in translation, and the copy isn't necessarily have perfect fidelity to the original raw data. And then the cohort builders, which are used by our citizen data scientists, they enable users to point and click and develop cohort definitions, such as pictured on the right-hand side. So you would first identify renal cell cancer patients by putting in diagnosis codes for those patients. Then you select patients with metastatic disease. And then you would define the treatments. This is usually done in a point-and-click interface where you enter codes for treatment, either procedure codes or medication codes. And finally, you can identify visits. So this can get you a flow of patients, basically an attrition table. The problem is that these cohort builders normally rely on common data models, and the ones that don't, they are usually very expensive, and they also require a learning curve. And on top of that, what we like to do in real-world data analytics is we like to have code lists that are vetted by clinical experts so that we're sure that we're capturing the right disease based on the diagnosis codes, the procedure codes. And so we want to work with pre-assembled code lists, and that's an additional challenge. So what we did in developing a large language model solution is we started by looking at our previous code for real-world data and looking at the studies and develop question-answer data sets for SQL. And so those questions were categorized into 3 difficulties: easy, medium, and hard. So easy is simple queries without any filtering or modification. Medium involves filtering, like where, unions, joins, or simple group by statements. And hard queries were multiple filtering operations or complex group bys or subqueries. And then to develop this application, we worked with a public data set called DSynPuff data. And this comes from, Medicare claims data. It's produced by CMS, and anybody can download it from their website. It's completely public. But it's very realistic in the sense that it mimics it's a synthetic version of their claims data. It has 5 tables, so it's a bit simplified, and 339 variables. So this is what we use to test our application. And next, I'd like to pass it to my colleague Tess to talk about the solution.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is, again, Tess Fagaber Meharizgi, or Tess, in short. So let's dive into the technical side, how we can build this solution as a pipeline. Let me start with a question. Which one of you have developed at least a Gen AI application specifically for the text-to-SQL? Anyone? Great, we have some. Okay, let's see if it's going to be aligned with what we have developed, because we can develop it in a different way. We're going to show you today on at least one way how we can develop this with AWS. So let's start with the text-to-SQL pipeline solution. So in this pipeline, the first thing I think that we need to put into is the instruction, right? We need to tell to the large language model what do we need to do. So that's the instruction. We're going to see this with an example. And then the other one is, let's see this one also to compare this with an analyst, right? So in order for someone to develop a text or to SQL, then we need to know the structure of the database, right? The schema of the database. So that's also needed as part of the input to the large language model. We need also some sample data to understand what the data looks like. So it's not necessarily to have just like everything. You can even anonymize. Sometimes if it is sensitive data, you can anonymize as long as it's similar with the actual data. And the other most important piece is also the few-shot examples. This is a reference example that we use for the LLM to use it as a reference so that we get similar outputs, because we might have different structures, we might expect with the different flavors, so that would help the LLM to have some references examples on this one. These are optional. It depends on the database, but if the columns are not intuitive enough, then you can add some more descriptions about which columns are describing for what, or what do they contain for, and also table descriptions. So for example, here for the SynPuff database, it was not intuitive, so we added this information as part of the inputs. And also you can add any other information that you think is important as part of the input. So we integrate all this, we create the system prompt, right? And then we have also some tools. You can integrate some tools so that these tools will be important to get some more information so that the LLM will have complete information to just like generate the SQL statement. For example, here for the SIMPATH database, we used one of the challenge that we had was in terms of it was not direct, or the information was not just like direct, where we have the names, for example, for the gender, it was not male or female, it was only the IDs. So if you ask like the male patients, there is no male in the database. There is an ID there. So what we created is we created these tools so that there will be a mapping between these IDs to the names so that the LLM will use that to exactly extract what this ID is in the database. So that was super helpful. And then actually the user input or the query will also be integrated. So all these ones will be input to the Amazon Bedrock large language model. And then that large language model will check whether there is a need for the lookup tool, right? The one that I said about the mapping. If there is a need, then it means that it will try to execute that. So it's just like a simple function that tries to execute to get the output for that so that it will be used as an additional context to the LLM, that means. So once it has all the information, then it will start to just like generate the SQL statement, that means. But one interesting thing that we added as a flavor was also to generate the summary. Because most of the time, if you ask a query, it might be ambiguous, even for an analyst to understand what you're looking for, right? So to make sure that the LLM is aligned with the expectation of the user, then we ask the LLM actually to generate the summary on what it's doing so that the user can just like check the alignment. And then they can tweak the input, that means accordingly. So let's see now the different pieces here. So it might be a little bit small, but just like I'll show you is different, different pieces here. So these are the instructions where you tell to the LLM, just like I want this, this, this. For the SQL, for example, as an example here, we have the SQLite, but you can have different dialects on here, and then you describe as clear as possible what you wanted to do. So that's the instructions. And then the next one is the database schema and also the sample data that you wanted to show or to tell to the LLM. So for example, here, these are the DDL statements. You can simply grab the data definition language statements, which are the creates table statements, and then fit in directly to the LLM, that means. And also some sample data, so you can have some records there, and then just put it that. Again, if it is a sensitive data, you can anonymize it and put it as part of the input. As I said, the table description is just a simple mapping between the table name and the description, because when you just like try to ask the query, then it means that it has to know which table contains what type of data, so that it will try to associate in addition to the schema. The table description is also the same thing. So we have, the table, the columns, and also the column description, and the few short examples. So in this example, for example, here we added here a pair of the inputs, which is an example query, plus also the output, what we're expecting for that pair. So we can add as much example and also diversify it enough so that it will understand what we are looking for. So here, for example, here we have 3 examples here with a pair of inputs plus the output query, that means. And also, if it is conversational, you need to have a context, or the LLM needs to have a context about the follow-up question, right? So if you ask one question and then you wanted to add just, for example, male inpatients, how about the female inpatients, or something like that? So it needs to have some context, so you can add also the conversation history. And at the end, we have also the tooling instruction. In terms of the actual tooling, you can define it in a different way, but this one is just like the schema, right? What the tool looks like. In this case, for example, here I have the gender tool, as I said, to map the actual gender with its ID. So we have, so for example here, gender tool, the description is it returns code for the gender. And then we have also what is the input that it's expecting, because the LLM has to prepare the input for that function to work. So it means that we have the gender string, because the male, for example, in gender, we have the male, and then the LLM has to prepare that male. It has to know the expected inputs for that. So we need to describe the gender as a string here in this case. And then if it is required or optional also, because if it is not required, then optionally it can pass it. But if it is required, then the LLM will try to grab some information from the input and then put it as an input to the tool, that means. And then this one is, so the first one is the schema, what it looks like. And then this one is the actual implementation of the tool. So in this tool, we have just a simple class. You can define it in a different way again, as a function or as a class. But it's a simple function that you can have, for example, here it's just in a JSON. You can get it from different sources. It could be from DynamoDB or other sources. But this one is an example here. We added just like as a JSON so that it will just get, based on the input, it will get the output or the lookup for that specific string. So again, that's just like a simple function. So now I have a recorded demo here. What I wanted to show you is just like what the tool looks like and how we can interact based on this, this solution. So as you can see here, this is just like the tool that we developed for Merck. And on the left side, we have the database, right? You can select different database. You can add any database that you have and select this database. The large language models, the embedding is just like to get similar examples for the feature learning. And also, you can also have the execution mode, whether you want to execute, go to the LLM or to the database and execute that. And then in the middle, you can see we have different pieces. So we expose everything that I explained here as part of that. What is this database containing? What is the table description? What is the column description? The schema of the database. So we have different pieces so that we have the transparency on what's going on, and even for the analyst or anyone asking, just like to refer if it is getting the same or exact information that we are looking for. So here in this case, for example, that's just like the database schema, and then the sample tables. We expose this as part of it. So we have this one. And then on the right side, we have the code editor, which is going to contain the output for the queries. And also, one thing that we also included is also we included the actual prompt actually here. So what you can do is just like you can even edit on the fly. So if it is not making sense, you can just like edit that one and then try to experiment with different ones. So now let's start with just like a simple query here. That's the input query that we can have in the command line. So I wanted to have just like find the total number of male inpatients. That's just like as an example, we want to showcase this, what it looks like from the output perspective. So once we query this, we're trying to get the total number of the male inpatients. So you can just like see what it looks like. So it gets into the LLM, and then we are getting actually the output. So on the right side, we have the actual SQL. So you can edit it directly because there could be some hallucination. It might not get it right, but we have this. And then on the center, we have to put also all the pieces. So for example, here we have the user input. We have also the tool that is used because male is not directly there in the database. So we had the tool, it has used the tool. So it means that it's the expected one. And then after that, we have the LLM summary. So the LLM summary says this query counts the total number of unique male inpatients. It does this by doing this, this, this. So it means that it's explaining everything how it's getting that actual SQL statement. That will really help in terms of if the LLM is getting right or is it getting, just like some misalignments, so that you make sure that the LLM is aligned with the user expectation on this one, that means. So we have the summary, that's a detailed one, and then at the end we have the actual SQL statement, that means. So once we have all the information, as the next one is just like, again, as I said, it's just like you can also edit the actual the SQL statement, but also you can turn on the execution so that you can see also the results. So if you have that one on, then you can press the run code, and then, for example, here you want to count the male inpatients here. We have around 16K male inpatients in that database as an example, that means. So let's see another example, a little bit vague. Just wanted to see how we can follow up with a conversation onto this one to see how the LLM handles all these things. So the question is, get the number of get the count of inpatients with the number of distinct primary diagnoses. So I need to count. It's just exactly the same, almost the same with what we had, but we want to have it just like, this could be a little bit vague because we're trying to get the grouping, right? The primary diagnosis per patient. But here, if we see the output here, we're just like it's simply counting the patients as a whole in the database, right? Because we don't have any, if we see here, we don't have any grouping around here. It's just like simply counting based on the patients, it's going to be a single number. So we can add a follow-up query for that to explain what our needs are. Because if we see here, even in the description, it's not getting it right because it's just like simply counting it. So as a follow-up question or as a follow-up query, we need to clarify, I want to group this one, right? So we can just like add a follow-up query for that. So we want to count the number of primary diagnosis codes each patient has. So we're just like explicitly mentioning this one because that's very important to make sure that we are eliminating the ambiguity that's happening here. So it will just get all the context around here. As you can see from here, we now have actually the grouping. It added the grouping here. So in line 5, you can see this one. We have grouped by the DSIMPAF ID, which is the patient ID that we have, and then it just gets it. So that's also the good thing. You don't need even just like to edit the actual SQL statement. The LLM by itself can just get that directly by using the natural language. And also at the same time, on the summary, it explains actually what it's doing. So if we can see from here, for example, here in number 3, it groups the results by patients. So it means that it got it right. That means with what we're looking for. So that's, again, just like we give the flexibility, actually. The good thing about this tool is just like we give the user a flexibility because we don't want to lock it, right? Because there is a lot of hallucination, as you know, right, with LLMs. It might not get it right. But at the same time, this is to empower analysts and also users or programmers to just like make sure that they're starting with something, but also just like add more information to clarify, the alignments, also even edit the actual SQL statement, that means. So that's a little bit about just like the tool. Now, let's see this simplified architecture diagram on what it looks like in terms of how we're building this, how we're just like getting into this. So the first one is just like we have the user, right? We have the user through the front-end application, just the same as what we have seen, a simplified UI that we saw. So we have the front end here. So the user will interact through the front end. We have the Amazon API gateway, which is going to be communicating to the Lambda function. So the user query will be submitted through the API gateway to the Lambda function. This Lambda is the main query processor. What it's doing is getting the examples, similar examples with what the user is looking for, because that would help just like in identifying and also customizing the examples that's going to be input as part of the prompt, that means. So we use the Amazon OpenSearch Serverless, which is going to be the vector database that's going to be looking for similar examples in our database. So what we did was just we curated a high quality, diversified examples. We put that in the vector database, and then at runtime, it will try to get the examples that we have, that means. So once it gets those examples, that Lambda function will pass through to another Lambda function to have the next step. So that's going to be the SQL generator. That's the main one that's going to be sending all these pieces together to the Amazon Bedrock for the LLM to generate the output, that means. So in this Bedrock, we have the tooling, and also we have the foundation models, the large language models. And then using those ones, then it will send back, it will generate the SQL in the summary, and then send back to the user. And at the same time, the good thing about this tool is also we save this output into DynamoDB for later usage, right? So for example, you might need to ask the same question, so you can just like refer that one. So you can optimize it in a different way, but we also save this one so that it can also be used at a later stage. The other one that I showed you also is the execution side, right? So once you generate, you can execute against the database that you have. So in this case, there is also another Lambda function that's going to execute the SQL and get the results from, for example, here, the database that we had was in Amazon Redshift, but it can be from different sources, any resource that you have. So this executor will just like take the SQL statement that was generated by the LLM, and then run this, and then get the results out of that to the user. And then the last one is also, since this one is going to be, we don't expect it to be a perfect one, we added also a feedback system so that the user at runtime might just like get some feedback, right? Okay, yeah, didn't get it right on this side, or this is a good quality, so that this will be used for further fine-tuning of the outputs, that means. So that will be also saved into the DynamoDB. So now I'll hand over back to Vlad to just like show the performance. Thank you.
Thanks, Tess. So we tried this on about 40 different questions that we developed from past data sources, and some examples of the questions are at the bottom right. Actually, Tess covered one of them, the second on the list, the medium difficulty. Select inpatients with a number of distinct primary diagnoses. And as you can see, actually, as Tess explained, that's an ambiguous question if you don't have a lot of background in real-world data analysis, because you can just count the inpatients. If you worked with real-world data, you know that what's of interest is that how many different primary diagnoses did the patient have, or how many different comorbidities or conditions that they have. That's what you're getting at with that question. But the large language model doesn't have that background, which is why that feedback loop is so important. And what I call that feedback loop here is the reprompt. So we can see that the model gets the question right on the first attempt about 80% of the time. And it doesn't actually matter whether it's easy, medium, or hard. The hard questions, were actually quite challenging and took, the real-world data scientists some time to figure out. But with a reprompt, just one additional kind of clarification from the user, only one clarification. It was able to get it right 100% of the time for easy and medium questions, and 95% of the time for hard questions. And most of our questions, more than half, were hard questions. So overall, on this small data set, we got over 97% accuracy. And just as background, the way that we determine the accuracy here is using these prompts, which were obtained from our studies. We had 2 data scientists review the answers and the questions. And we did this kind of in series. And even after the review of one data scientist, the second data scientist actually found mistakes. So I would say that this model may be more accurate than perhaps me. So yeah, that's that last bullet, that the reviewers made errors. So impact and future directions. What do we want to do next? So right now, we demonstrated it on this SynPuff data set, but we don't actually use this data set for research. We want to apply this to all of the other databases that some of which I showed in an earlier slide. So expanding it to other databases, we want to roll it out to all of our real-world data users. So we're putting it into production right now. We also want to optimize the performance. Some of the things that Tess mentioned in terms of storing the questions, getting user feedback, that's going to be really important when we actually try different large language models, try different prompts. So that's another step. And the questions that we obtained from prior code may not be exactly the same as questions that actual users ask. So we want to develop a real data set of real questions and evaluate on those. And finally, the method of evaluating, where we have two data scientists, one by one, review each of the questions, is very time-consuming. So we want to explore more automated solutions at checking accuracy, like exact matching, execution accuracy, things like that. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming.